Imagine waking up tomorrow, finding this unexplained severe spot on your skin, and by noon, you are entirely banished from your city, your family, basically your entire life. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
May God bless your day and the week ahead, because today, well, we are exploring what it takes to bring a person back from the profound isolation of the ancient world. I'm your host, and I'm here with our expert to dig into this.
Yeah, we are looking really closely at the ancient texts today, specifically Leviticus chapter 14. And we're guided by the incredibly detailed insights from both the Holman and NAA study Bibles.
Right.
And, the scenario you just painted, that is the exact reality these texts address. I mean, this isn't just about a medical condition.
No, it's way more than that.
It is the absolute definition of social and spiritual exile. You aren't just battling an illness out there in the wilderness. You are battling complete, crushing loneliness.
And usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis today, the focus is, well, it's entirely on the biological. Like you get an infection, you go into a sterile clinic, a doctor runs a swab.
Right. Very clinical.
Yeah, the lab sends back a digital result to some portal and you pick up a prescription. The transaction is private and usually pretty invisible to your community, cured or not cured, clean and simple.
Exactly. But for the person in the ancient world who actually survives this severe skin disease, who watches the spots fade and the skin heal, getting their life back is this incredibly public, deeply symbolic journey.
Because, how do you convince an entire community that you are no longer a walking contagion?
Right. And to understand that journey, we really have to clarify a foundational point from our sources. The priests in ancient Israel who, oversaw this entire process, they didn't actually cure the disease.
Wait, really? So they weren't healers in the biological sense?
No, not at all. They were not ancient doctors handing out medicinal ointments or prescribing remedies to fight the illness. According to the text, God provided the healing.
Okay, so the biological change happened entirely independently of the priesthood.
Yeah. The priests acted as diagnosticians and, more importantly, as the gatekeepers of restoration. Their job was to facilitate the really complex, highly specific rituals necessary to officially readmit the healed person back into the community of the faithful.
So they managed the transition from exile to belonging.
Exactly.
Let's unpack the sheer mechanics of that transition because, well, the process of getting back into the community is staggeringly vivid. Before a healed person can even set foot near the camp boundaries, this highly tactile ritual has to take place out in the wilderness.
Yeah, the priest actually has to leave the safety of the community.
Right, he goes out into the exile zone to meet the person where they are.
And that physical movement, it really sets the tone for the entire process. The priest deliberately crosses the boundary of the camp to examine the person in their isolation.
Wow.
And if the priest determines that the plague of the skin disease is indeed healed, he doesn't just, hand over a scroll declaring them clean.
Like a modern clean bill of health.
Right, no paperwork here. He orders a very specific, symbolic set of items to be brought for purification. 2 live, clean birds, some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and a plant called hyssop.
I always find these lists fascinating because they seem so, arbitrary to a modern reader. Like, why those 4 specific things?
Well, the Holman notes break down the specific properties of these items, and it reveals the logic of the ancient mind. I mean, these aren't random objects.
Okay.
Cedar wood, for example, it was highly valued in the ancient Near East for its resistance to rot and decay. It naturally repels insects and preserves things.
So basically a symbol of preservation.
Exactly, preservation and incorruptibility. Then you have the scarlet yarn that's colored with a brilliant red dye that actually comes from crushing kermes or scale insects.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the visual representation of blood, which, in this worldview is synonymous with life itself.
And the hyssop.
The hyssop is this very bushy, highly absorbent plant that was abundant in Israel. It basically functioned as an ancient paintbrush or a sponge, and it was frequently associated with purification rituals.
So you have elements representing preservation, the life force of blood red color, and a tool for application.
Right.
And the way they are used together is incredibly visceral. One of the live birds is slaughtered in a clay pot, but the text insists it has to be done over fresh, living water, like running water from a stream or a spring.
Yeah, and mixing the blood of the bird with living water is a profound theological statement. In the ancient mindset, stagnant water is associated with death and disease.
Oh, sure.
Running fresh water is life. So by mixing the atoning blood of the sacrificed bird with the living water, you are creating this really potent symbol of life conquering death.
And then the priest takes the second bird, the one that's still alive, along with the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop. He dips all of those elements into that mixture of blood and living water.
And then he sprinkles it.
Right. He sprinkles that mixture over the healed person 7 times and declares them clean. I mean, I'm just trying to picture the sensory overload of that moment.
Oh, it would be intense.
You've been isolated for months, maybe years. You haven't been touched by another human being. And the first point of contact to declare your exile over is the smell of cedar, the sound of running water, and the very tactile feeling of this mixture being sprinkled on you.
Yeah, it's a profound contrast to the sterile isolation of modern medicine.
Absolutely.
And the climax of that ritual is what happens to the second bird. After the sprinkling, the priest releases the live bird into the open field.
Just lets it go.
Yeah. The Holman notes draw a direct parallel here to the scapegoat ritual that happens on the Day of Atonement, where a goat is sent off into the wilderness carrying the sins of the people.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. That live bird flying away visually represents the disease, the impurity, and the crushing isolation just being carried away.
Yeah.
It symbolizes the person's literal liberation from the chains of death. They were practically a walking ghost, and now, well, they are free.
I mean, you watch that bird fly off into the horizon, and the psychological weight of your banishment just lifts. But the protocol doesn't actually end there, does it?
No, not at all. Releasing the bird just gets you past the first checkpoint.
Right. Re-entering society requires this meticulously phased physical reset. You don't just walk straight back into your living room and sit on the couch.
No, it is a highly structured, gradual transition period. The architecture of restoration recognizes that you don't just flip a switch from being an outcast to being fully integrated.
So what happens next? The person first has to wash their clothes, take a full bath, and shave off all their hair.
All of it.
Yeah, and only after that are they allowed to step foot inside the camp boundary. However, they are still forbidden from going inside their own tent.
Right. They have to live outside their own home for 7 days.
Which is wild. You can probably hear your family talking inside, but you can't join them yet. And then on the 7th day, the text mandates a second total shave.
Yes, a complete shave.
They have to shave their head, their beard, and specifically their eyebrows. Like, shaking the eyebrows feels so extreme to me.
It does sound extreme.
It makes me think this isn't just about hygiene or, checking for new skin spots anymore. It's almost like they are being stripped down to resemble a newborn baby.
Well, you are hitting on the exact theological core there.
Yeah.
The 7-day delay certainly serves a practical purpose as a period of absolute verification to ensure the disease hasn't returned.
Sure, practical health measures.
But that second shaving, literally removing every single hair that might harbor any physical or spiritual remnant of the past impurity, that ensures they are entirely reborn.
Wow.
They are entering a state of total vulnerability. They are a blank slate, physically and spiritually, preparing for the most important step on the 8th day.
Because the 8th day is when the ultimate reset happens at the sanctuary. Up until now, everything has been about moving from the wilderness into the camp. Now it's about moving into the presence of God.
Exactly. On the 8th day, the person approaches the tent of meeting, which is the center of the community and the dwelling place of God.
And what do they bring?
They bring 3 unblemished lambs, 2 male and 1 female. They also bring fine flour mixed with oil and a separate log of oil.
Okay, I have to pause on that list because 3 perfect lambs and fine flour, that represents a massive amount of wealth in an agrarian society.
It's incredibly expensive.
Right. If you've been sick and banished for months, you haven't been working, your family might be really struggling.
Yeah, and the text beautifully addressed that economic reality. Both the NWA and Holman notes highlight the profound grace of God built into this legislation.
Oh, really? What do they say?
There is a specific detailed provision for the poor. If a person cannot afford 3 lambs, they are permitted to substitute 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons for the burnt offering and the sin offering.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they only need to bring 1 lamb for the guilt offering.
That structural empathy is just incredible. It guarantees that absolutely no one remains permanently excluded from the community or, from God's presence simply because poverty compounded their illness.
Exactly. God scales the requirement to the person's ability. However, the study notes also point out something critical about the theology of atonement here.
Which is?
The blood of the sacrifice cannot be substituted with money or grain.
Hmm.
The blood is deemed absolutely essential for the ritual, but the type of animal is adjusted so that restoration remains accessible to every single person, regardless of their status.
So the priest takes the sacrifice, whether it's the wealthy person's lamb or the poor person's bird, and slaughters the guilt offering. And then we get to a ritual application that is incredibly specific.
Very specific.
The priest takes some of the blood from that sacrifice and he places it on the healed person's right earlobe, on their right thumb, and on the big toe of their right foot. When I was reading through this, my mind immediately went to a modern piece of technology. I kept thinking of it as like a full body factory reset.
A factory reset is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. It is a highly localized, deliberate application.
Yeah, it's a top to bottom consecration of how this person interacts with the world. The ear represents their input, right? Like what they listen to and hear.
Right.
The thumb represents their output, what they do with their hands, their daily labor. And the toe represents their path, where they choose to walk and the direction of their life.
And the Holman notes provide some essential historical context to support that reading. The ears were especially important in the ancient sanctuary system because people verbally confessed their sins to the priest.
Oh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, so hearing the declaration of forgiveness was paramount. Zooming out, those extremities, the ear, the thumb, the toe, they represent the outermost points of the human body.
Right.
By anointing those specific points, the priest is signifying that the entirety of the person, from head to toe, the sum total of their actions and directions, is being restored and consecrated to God.
And the ritual adds one more layer to those extremities, doesn't it? After the blood is applied, the priest sprinkles some oil 7 times before the Lord.
Yes.
Then he places that oil directly on top of the blood on the right earlobe, the right thumb, and the right big toe. And whatever oil is left in his hand, he just pours over the person's head.
The sequencing there is everything. The blood always comes first to cover the past impurity and make atonement.
Okay.
And then the oil, which throughout ancient texts symbolizes the empowerment and presence of God's Spirit that is placed on top of the blood to empower them for their future life in the community.
They are forgiven, and then they are equipped.
Exactly. They are fully back.
It's a stunningly beautiful progression. But, one of the most fascinating turns in Leviticus 14 is that the text doesn't stop with human bodies.
No, it takes a really interesting pivot.
We transition to a section that fundamentally shifts our modern understanding of sickness. Impurity wasn't just a biological virus to the ancient mind. It was a spiritual state that could cling to stone and wood just as easily as it clung to skin.
Yeah, we move from the healing of the human body to the healing of the physical home.
Right.
The focus shifts entirely to the future. God speaks to Moses and Aaron, giving them instructions for when they eventually cross the Jordan and settle in the promised land of Canaan.
Uh-huh.
He states that he will send plagues of leprosy, which, in the context of architecture, refers to spreading mold, mildew, or a fungal infection into their houses.
I want you listening to just look around the room you are in right now. Imagine the walls themselves carrying a moral weight.
It's a crazy thought.
You're a homeowner in Canaan, and you notice these greenish or reddish spots spreading on your stone walls. They look like they're eating into the plaster, deeper than the surface. You have to go report this to the priest.
You don't call a contractor.
Right. You literally say to the priest, "It seems to me there's a plague in my house."
And the priest's immediate response is an incredible example of practical mercy woven into ceremonial law.
How so?
Well, before he steps foot inside the house to inspect the mold, he orders the owner to completely empty the house of all their possessions. Furniture, clothing, cooking vessels, everything goes outside.
And I found myself wondering why he wouldn't just take a quick look first before making them move all their heavy furniture. Like, why empty it out?
It comes down to the severe legal consequence of the priest's declaration. If the priest walks in, observes the walls, and officially declares the house ceremonially unclean,
Oh, I see.
then by law, everything located inside that house at that exact moment also absorbs that uncleanliness.
So if your clothes and your family's heirloom pots are still in there, you lose them all. They become tainted.
Precisely. By ordering the house to be emptied first, the priest is performing a deliberate act of grace. He is protecting the owner's belongings from the contagion of impurity before the legal declaration is made.
That empathetic detail completely changes how you view these laws. So, the house is cleared out, The priest inspects the walls. If he sees the deep greenish or reddish spots, he locks up the house, putting the building itself under a 7-day quarantine.
Yeah, and after 7 days, he returns for a second inspection. If the mold has spread along the walls, the response is aggressive.
What do they do?
The infected stones are physically torn out of the wall and hauled completely outside the city to a designated unclean place.
Wow.
The entire interior of the house is scraped down, the contaminated dust is thrown away outside the city, and brand new stones and fresh plaster are installed to rebuild the wall.
I have to point out that if you read the EPA guidelines for modern toxic mold remediation, it sounds almost exactly like
It
this.
really does.
You isolate the area, physically remove the contaminated drywall or materials, scrape down the framing, clean the dust, and rebuild with fresh materials. It begs the question, is this section of Leviticus just a brilliant, ancient version of health and safety protocols? Or is there a deeper spiritual component to a house getting sick?
Well, that tension between the practical and the spiritual is exactly what the NWA and Holman notes address. Undoubtedly, these protocols had immense practical health benefits for the community.
Because toxic mold is dangerous.
Right, toxic mold in an enclosed stone house is incredibly dangerous to human lungs. But the sources heavily emphasize that the ceremonial and spiritual importance completely overshadowed the physical hygiene in the minds of the ancient Israelites.
So what's the evidence in the text that elevates it from just good hygiene to a spiritual matter?
It's found in the ritual that follows a successful repair. If the new stones are put in, the house is replastered, and the mold does not return, meaning the house is cured, the priest has to perform a purification ritual for the building.
Okay.
And it is the exact same elaborate ritual he performed for the healed human being.
Wait, they use the birds again?
Yes. The priest takes the 2 live, clean birds, the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, the hyssop, and the living water,
For a house.
for a house. He slaughters 1 bird, dips the elements and the live bird in the blood and water mixture, sprinkles a physical house 7 times, and lets the live bird fly away into the open field.
That is wild.
The text uses language that treats the structure of stone and plaster as if it has a moral impurity that needs to be cleansed, atoned for, and forgiven.
Treating a building with the same spiritual gravity as a human soul is, well, it's difficult for our modern minds to grasp. We treat our homes as real estate, as investments, or just as shelters.
But in their worldview, the spaces where human beings lived, slept, and gathered were profoundly sacred. A home was the nucleus of the community and a place where they ultimately experienced communion with God.
Right.
So if the physical environment was corrupted, it disrupted that communion just as much as a bodily illness did. The space itself had to be reconciled to God.
And the text gives a pretty grim alternative. If the house couldn't be cleansed, like if the mold comes back after the replastering, breaking through the new stone in what the text calls a fretting or spreading leprosy, there is no third chance.
No, it resulted in total demolition. The priest orders the entire house to be torn down. Every stone, every piece of timber, all the mortar, it is all dismantled and hauled away to an unclean place outside the city limits.
Which is devastating.
It serves as a stark physical reminder to the community that some corruption, once it is too deeply set into the foundation, cannot just be painted over or managed. It has to be completely uprooted and removed to protect the integrity of the rest of the community.
When we look back at the entire arc of Leviticus 14, from the banished person sitting in the dirt outside the camp, to the intricate rituals of blood and living water, to the blood-tipped earlobes, and finally to the tearing down of moldy stone walls, it is very easy to write this off as an archaic, bizarre rulebook from thousands of years ago.
It is, yeah. But if you look at the underlying mechanics, as we have today, you see a system that represents something much deeper about the human condition.
Definitely. These texts represent a highly structured, profoundly empathetic pathway out of total isolation. It was a tangible, sensory way to take someone who felt like a walking ghost and bring them back into the warmth of their community, their family, and the presence of their God.
It was incredibly intentional.
Right. It wasn't just a nod in the street. It was a communal, physical way of declaring you are clean, you are welcome, you belong here again.
We can call it the architecture of restoration. This ancient text acknowledges a truth we often forget. Healing isn't just about the physical disappearance of a symptom. True healing requires social, emotional, and spiritual reintegration.
And that leaves me with a thought I really want you to mull over as you go about your week, whether you are at work, at home, or with your friends. In our modern world, we possess absolutely brilliant medical treatments. We can cure diseases with a pill or an injection that these ancient people couldn't even fathom.
Thank goodness for that.
Seriously. We can clear up the biological symptoms efficiently and privately. But when someone has been deeply isolated, whether that isolation was caused by a long illness, by an addiction, by a massive public mistake, or just by the sheer crushing loneliness of our modern culture, do we have anything equivalent to these community-wide, deeply symbolic rituals?
That's a great point.
Do we have a structured way to emotionally and socially restore people? A way to look them in the eye and definitively, publicly declare, you belong to us again? Or do we just expect people who have been in the wilderness to quietly walk back into the room and pretend the isolation never happened?
That is a profound question to consider regarding how we build community today.
It really is. The ancient world might have lacked our medicine, but they understood the cure for exile. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Leviticus 14. We hope it gave you a new lens to view these ancient texts. Goodbye, everyone. God blesses all the listeners. Have a wonderful week.